Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking right past the dry dates and dusty old ledgers to trace a beautifully human, fully documented story. We are going to follow the lives of James and Hannah Richman to truly understand the real, boots-on-the-ground socioeconomic realities of 1840s rural England. Okay, picture this for a second. It's the spring of 1843 in the village of Hilperton, Wiltshire. There's mist clinging to the water meadows along the River Avon. You can literally smell the warm bread being pressed into a laborer's hands before a massive day's work. And echoing down Marsh Lane from first light to long shadows is the steady rhythmic clicking of the weaver's loom. This is a working-class village waking up, and it's the exact crucible where our story begins. Okay, let's dive right into this roadmap. We'll trace their path from courtship in 1843 through their 1845 wedding, straight into the arrival of their children in 1848 and 49. It is an absolutely incredible story of survival and ambition. Section 1, Village Life in 1843, A Tale of Two Workers. To really get a grip on this era, we've got to look closely at their daily grind. James is 22. He's an agricultural laborer, broad-shouldered with hands totally roughened up from farm work and hauling coal on the canal. Hannah Rich is just 18, but having grown up spinning right at her mother's side, she's already a highly accomplished weaver. Their identities were forged in intense physical labor. Now, what's really interesting about this is the fascinating contrast in their hidden ambitions, because both of them fiercely pursued literacy, but they did it in entirely different ways. James came to his letters late, quite literally tracing shapes by firelight from a borrowed alphabet. Meanwhile, Hannah quietly taught herself to read using her father's weaving order books. In a world that basically viewed them as just manual labor, their minds were their own quiet rebellion. And that brings us to their first real interaction at the village Sunday school. James noticed Hannah sitting by a window reading, and the source material highlights this incredibly specific, vital detail. She read without moving her lips. Now, to James, who had struggled by firelight just to learn his letters, this was a total revelation. He instantly recognized her true intelligence in that silent, practiced reading. It was this profound connection of two minds seeking so much more than what their village offered. Section 2. A Measured Courtship. The Rules of Engagement. In a small village like Hilperton, courtship was definitely not some whirlwind romance. A young woman's reputation was her absolute most valuable asset, so immense patience was mandatory. After securing her father's permission, James finally gets a moment alone with her in November 1843. Walking along the freezing Avon and Kennet Canal, he formally presents his case. No false promises, just an offering of hard work, a willingness to read, and a stubborn determination to somehow better himself. Hannah listens, looks out at the gray water, and gives just a profoundly pragmatic response. She tells him her mother never learned to read, but she did. She says, "I taught myself, mostly, from my father's order books. I don't intend to forget how." She is fiercely protecting her hard-won literacy, establishing exactly who she is before she ever says yes. When James assures her he wouldn't ever ask her to forget, she turns those calm gray eyes to him and simply accepts his proposal. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. The Economics of Marriage, Building a Life from Scratch. Because saying yes was actually just the starting line. Now came the cold, hard economics of starting a household. We're talking about 2 sets of rough sheets, wool blankets saved up over winters, some earthenware dishes, and an heirloom iron pot. Think of this as basically the ultimate 1840s wedding registry. This was the literal transfer of practical wealth between the women of the family, and it was absolutely essential for survival in a damp stone cottage. And while the women were gathering those household goods, James was executing this grueling checklist. For 2 full years, he practiced agonizingly disciplined arithmetic. He saved his wages steadily, completely avoiding the ale at the inn on market days, setting aside a shilling here and a 6pence there. He finally secured a tiny 12-foot-wide cottage down on Marsh Lane. And then the banns were read in church for 3 Sundays to ensure there were absolutely no legal impediments to their union. And this brilliantly illustrates their dynamic once they were actually living together. Hannah continued to take in weaving, and when James casually referred to her earnings as ours, she shut that down quick. "It's mine that I'm putting toward ours," she said. "The distinction matters." It's such a striking snapshot of a working-class marriage built on really firm boundaries and deep mutual respect. Section 4. The Wedding Day. September 7th, 1845. So it's harvest season. The urgent, backbreaking work of the village is finally done. The records paint this gorgeous picture of a bright Wiltshire morning, with the early autumn light making the limestone buildings just glow gold. But there was no elaborate white wedding gown here. Hannah stood at the altar in a dark blue wool dress that she had meticulously woven, cut, and sewn entirely herself over the preceding winter. Her best hand-woven work was her bridal attire. Now, I want you to really think about this for a second as they stand before the officiating clergyman, William Tolman. The ceremony finishes up, and they are handed the official marriage register. We know James learned to write his letters by firelight, and he signs his name deliberately. But how does Hannah, this highly intelligent, self-taught reader who absorbed her father's order books, how does she sign this permanent legal document? So, the crucial point is, she signs with a mark, just an X. It's a heartbreaking historical contradiction embedded right there in the parish records. Despite her quiet intelligence and fluent reading, the limits of her self-education meant she had literally never been taught to write. She simply makes her mark, a harsh fact of the world they were born into, but one they silently agreed would absolutely not remain true for their own children. Section 5. Building a Family. Life in Marsh Lane. Let's get into the gritty reality of life inside that cramped, 12-foot-wide cottage. They built a fascinating domestic rhythm together. Battling the damp chill of the 1845 winter, James would read aloud from borrowed newspapers in the evenings, while Hannah, working her loom, kept all their household accounts perfectly in her head. It was a true intellectual partnership, thriving in a remarkably constrained space. And, well, that tiny space gets crowded pretty fast. Their first son, Thomas, arrived in June 1848, carrying some heavy emotional weight. He was named for James's brother, who had died just a year earlier. Then came James Jr. in November 1849. Suddenly, this tiny stone cottage is completely filled with the noise, the appetite, and the immense responsibility of a rapidly growing family. Which brings us to Section 6, Seeds of a New World. The pressure of this growing family pushed James's ambition into absolute overdrive. By 1848, the thought of America really takes root. During those long, grueling physical hours doing canal work, he realized that no matter how hard they worked or how perfectly Hannah managed the accounts, England could only ever offer a partial answer for his children's future. The class ceiling was just too low, and that stone cottage was just too small. But hey, dreaming about America and actually packing up your entire life to leave, those are two very different things. So I have to ask, what specific event forces a settled, hardworking family so deeply woven into the daily fabric of Hilburton to abandon absolutely everything they know and risk crossing the Atlantic Ocean? What could possibly shatter this carefully constructed village life? Well, as the historical records reveal, it wasn't just a slow build of ambition. It was a sudden, jarring catalyst, a false accusation, a harrowing legal ordeal, a single moment that would force the Richmans to make an agonizing leap from the old world to the new. But that dramatic climax, the entire transformation from Wiltshire weavers to American pioneers, that is a story for another explainer. Until then, looking at the life James and Hannah built from nothing, ask yourself, what would it take for you to leave everything behind? Thanks for exploring this incredible slice of history with us today.